This episode is brought to you by my Fertility Friday group programs. New groups are starting in April of 2017, and there are only a limited number of spaces available. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 129. Welcome to the 129th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. This is my first episode that I'm airing of my new fertility awareness reality series. And so today I have a fantastic interview with one of my clients. And so it's a live client session. We're delving into her charts. I have Lita on the show with me today, and she reached out to me to gain confidence using fertility awareness for birth control. And so we've been working together for a while, and she wanted to come on the show and share what her experience has been like. And also we get down to the nitty gritty on some of the questions that she has on her charts. And so parts of the interview, you won't be able to obviously see her chart, but you'll hear us refer to it and some of the materials that I use in my client work. So just keep that in mind as you're watching it. And of course, any suggestions and advice that I give within the context of our meeting, they're not meant to be taken as any type of medical advice because I am not a doctor and I don't play one on the internet. I also just want to share some updates with you. So I am accepting applications for the Fertility Friday group programs. I'm launching the programs in April. And so there's still spaces available. I'd love to have you in the group. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to apply. And by popular demand, I'm actually hosting a live masterclass in April. So every time I talk about periods and I really get down into the nitty gritty about what's normal, how much bleeding you should have, what the flow should look like, what it could mean in terms of your hormonal health, if your periods are too light or if they're too heavy, I always get a really deep and profound, energized response. And when I released the recent episode that I did on that topic, episode number 127, that was no different. And I'm so excited to introduce my guest today, Lita. So as you know, this session, we're doing a live client session today. And so Lita's one of my clients who was brave and courageous enough, wanted to come on the show and share a little bit about her experience. And so I'm really happy to have her today. It's kind of funny because in my client sessions, I'm never talking into a mic. And so it feels a little bit awkward, I have to admit, to be talking into the mic while we're talking. But Lita's being a great sport about it. So welcome to the show, Lita.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Or good morning, Lisa. Hello, everybody.
Yes. Well, happy to have you here. And just to give the listeners a little bit of background and about how you came to this awareness and what led you to want to go down this path and take the natural route as far as non-hormonal birth control is concerned.
Let's see. So I, throughout my developing life, I saw many friends choose different birth control methods. And I'll share I was a little later, who knows, comparatively to the sexy time scene. I started having sex with my partner intercourse around 23. So I'd had a lot of time to observe, and I'd seen a lot of friends have a hard time. They felt like a lot of friends who were on hormonal birth control, their emotional ups and downs or gaining weight or acne. And other friends shared that they were put on it really early, around 15 or 16, and kind of confused about whether to stay on it or not. And then around 23 or 24, a good friend of mine in a women's circle was talking about fertility awareness and wanting to kind of teach it. But then a woman in our area was a technical teacher, and that was how I found your podcast, Sarah Bly. And then I found her interview on this podcast, and then I got hooked on the many different ways that just knowing your cycle, it just really clicked with me to just all the benefits of getting to know your system and seeing what changes as you grow and different stresses affect you. And that just felt like, in a way, a little more difficult than other methods outright, like a little more time to get to know yourself. But it seemed like this method seems to just have benefits, and the challenge is a challenge that I'm up for.
Well, I can relate to what you said about being a bit of a late bloomer and having the benefit of being able to observe the experiences of your friends and things like that. I feel like in some ways having that bit of time to reflect and just observe gives you a different type of insight. It's unfortunately then your friends who jump in first and try the birth control pill first, they're more like the guinea pigs and then they report back. But yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And one of the things that struck me when you first reached out to me and we had our first couple of sessions together was that you're one of my very few only client who has never used hormonal contraceptives. Yeah.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I think I told you at the gynecologist, she could tell when swabbing me that she could tell that I wasn't on hormonal birth control. And she said it was very, very rare.
That's interesting. I'd be interested to see how she could tell that you never were.
Yeah.
So she was probably swabbing you in your fertile window.
Yeah. She saw stuff she doesn't usually see.
Oh, that makes me sad, actually, if I take time to think about that most women just don't ever have that. But I digress. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about was around birth control. And so primarily at this particular moment in time, we've been working together to really get a handle on the birth control piece of it. So learning the method, figuring out which days are fertile, which days aren't. And you alluded to how the Justice method, the method that I teach, has a few more hurdles in the beginning, or at least it can. And so I'd love to hear what your experience has been like so far, delving into all of that and kind of sorting through it all.
Yeah, I think part of some of the hurdles have been getting over assumptions and just kind of ideas of other methods that just through the grapevine I've heard from friends and my mom, and confusions using body awareness like kind of more loosely. And I think that has been a big one. I think there's apps that have like you chart when you bleed and then it kind of fills in the rest. And I think stuff like that has been maybe what I thought it would be more like. And that has been good when you've been like, well, when you're guessing that's something, but it's not the Justice fertility awareness method. And yeah, just getting to that point where I'm sure of fertile and not fertile days. That is what drew me into the method, because then I feel like that is a legitimate birth control method, or family planning, or not family planning. It's another method. I think, yeah, it's what I'm looking forward to. And also what's kind of frustrating because it's not that predicting part. That just comes up so much with me. Like, these are the days that I'm going to be able to try this method out. Wait, I don't know that yet. And then just, the detail charting, the letters and numbers, trying to get that down so that while I have your assistance in reading my charts, I can share what's going on accurately. And that is still really challenging for me.
Well, I have to say that one of the things that I think there's so many different things I could say. I think the first thing I always tell my clients, especially in that first session or two, when everything's brand new, that it often does feel, because you're learning a new language, essentially. I'm guiding you through the process. And so it often feels like a lot of information. But just like anything else, as soon as you go through a cycle or two, then it really starts to click. But there's something to be said for going through a full chart, going through 2 full charts from menstruation to the end, ovulation, temperature rises. From what I've experienced personally, and then what I've also experienced as an educator, is that it does typically take about 2 or 3 full cycles before you feel confident, before you start to feel confident. So you might get it intellectually, but that's when you start to feel it. You start to experience it, which is different than understanding it in your head.
And feel it, but also not predict it.
Yeah. I feel like in your case as well, because you've never taken hormonal contraceptives. So although you can't predict what's happening, your cycle parameters are fairly straightforward, and your cycles overall are quite healthy. So what we're seeing a more typical pattern, which we would see, your actually, let me pull up your chart while we're talking about patterns and whatnot. And so typically what we've seen in your charts over the last couple of cycles is that your cycle parameters are healthy. So we're seeing menstruation, several dry days, and then we're seeing some days of mucus. And of course, that's where the variation can happen because ovulation isn't going to happen on the same day of every cycle. But then after that, we would see dry days, your luteal phase. So although you can't predict what's happening, you can appreciate the pattern. And that will make it helpful for you to identify when you're shifting from your infertile phase to your fertile phase type of thing. So I have up your charts for February and March. And I guess a good place to start today would be the form, the check-in form. So I'm just going to pull that up. And so for the listeners, I always go through, it's kind of just like a checklist that allows me to just make sure that we've covered all of the observational routine regarding the different rules around charting, those types of things. So we always go through that together. So that's what we're looking at right now. But Lita, as you were going through that form, was there anything that came to mind or anything that you want to make sure that we're covering today?
Just kind of, I'm in the mostly zone on a lot of things. It seems like an important next step to learn the difference between mucus, arousal fluid, and semen, but I haven't had the chance too much yet with some tips for arousal fluid and mucus might be nice.
Mm-hmm. Well, so one of the main differences between arousal fluid and mucus is that arousal fluid is lighter and it doesn't have the same type of staying power. So with mucus, when you have it, when you wipe and then you have some on the tissue and you are able to stretch it between your fingers, with mucus, you would be able to do that a couple of times and it would continue to just be on your fingers. So it has a bit of staying power, whereas arousal fluid will dissipate typically between your fingers. So even though you have that sensation and you'll notice something on the tissue, it's going to like be gone.
Okay.
Have you ever noticed something like that?
Probably. Yeah, I'm not sure. I probably have, but.
All right. Well, let's take a quick look at your chart. This is the one that you just sent me. So on any of those days where you had mucus, was it fairly obvious? So on these days, it looks like you had stretchy mucus that you could actually...
Yeah, I feel like last month I kind of finally got that it was kind of finally the point came home that it wasn't just what I was seeing most of the time throughout the day. So I was marking like all day, and most of the time I was noticing whatever sign. And then last time I just realized the most fertile one. So yeah, I feel like then it made it easier, even if I saw peak style mucus one time and was really sure of it, then I marked it. Yeah, I was curious that I had a little dry day in between there, but I didn't mark very well. I still have lots of improvement with the notations. I feel like I wrote it down and then I look back and it doesn't really tell us all that much, but I'm working on it.
Well, but let me say, I mean, you're like, this chart is fantastic. So I think we've talked about this before. One of the things I always stress is that there's no such thing as a perfect chart. And the first chart or two that you have, the first complete ones, they're really learning charts. And so they're never going to be perfect. Mine weren't perfect when I started learning this method. And I had been charting for a while before I adopted this particular method. So it's really not about perfection. It's more just about getting the hang of it. And the chart is a tool that allows you to record what you see. But ultimately, the most important part is that you understand what you see. And then you know what to do when you see those things. So the chart helps you to do that, to understand and interpret. But Lita, it looks great.
Thank you. Yeah, having the time, that new chart was helpful. Thank you. The temperature in Fahrenheit for us, not North Americans, but U.S. people who haven't learned the Celsius yet is helpful. And having the time on there was really nice. So I could easily see and note what time I took my temperature at.
Well, what's been interesting is that as I told you, with most of my clients, they adopt to using the online web-based application to chart their cycles. I always had an assumption that most women would want to chart via some sort of electronic device. But when I look back, I started charting as well on paper. And I still to this day believe that charting on paper when you start is the best way to learn. Not that you have to or you don't have to. I don't really, that's not the essence of what I'm saying. But when you're plotting things on a piece of paper, then there's nothing there to tell you or predict anything for you.
Yeah.
And so it trains you, just like what we were talking about before, it trains you to really get the different mindset. Part of the method is the mindset, which is that what you're doing here is you're getting to the end of each day and you're deciding whether or not that's a fertile day based on what you saw that day. And it has nothing to do with what happened last cycle or what you think is going to happen tomorrow. It's really on a day-to-day basis that you're deciding. And I find that with paper charting, that's your only option. You just have this piece of paper. And even with your temperatures, it helps you to get a clear sense of when the shift happens, because you physically have to get a ruler out and draw the baseline to divide the pre and post ovulatory temperatures. So having the physical act of doing that, Lita is using a paper chart. So I have some paper charts and I shared them with her. So she printed them out and she records her information on the paper chart. And then she'll send me a picture of it so that we can look at it in our sessions together. And I love it. I love that you're using paper charts. It's like
Yes, sometimes the technological part of this gets me. Yes. So good old paper.
Well, and I just wanted to check in with you about your temperatures. So from what I see here, so we have some days of mucus. You do have a random dry day in there, which isn't uncommon. Again, because we think about the pattern and, there must be this many, days of mucus before ovulation. But sometimes it does happen like that, where you'll have a couple days of mucus and then it'll back off a little bit for a day or two, and then you'll start to see some more before ovulation. But from what I see here, your temperatures kind of were spiking up and down here. Was anything happening on these days or?
Well, the last 2 days I've been feeling sick, but I have been getting a lot of sleep. And so my temperature didn't seem to spike with sickness, but I almost feel like today was so low. I got a ton of sleep. I don't know why it was low today in those days.
And do you think that you've ovulated already?
I think so. I think it was like the 13th or 14th day, somewhere between the 98.3, or I guess that'd be the 15th and 16th. That's what I feel.
Okay. And what makes you, do you have other symptoms around ovulation?
Yeah, I was noticing my temperatures didn't get up to, a lot of times they spike up to 98.5 or 6, but on the back I kind of felt, I think I wrote that, felt like uterus was jiggling around.
Yeah.
And I had peak style mucus and my temperatures were up-ish.
Well, so we have peak mucus on the 11th day, dry day on the 12th day. The 13th day, we have peak mucus. The 14th day, do you remember what was going on there? So you put down lubricative. Do you remember if you had like a stretchy, clear stuff? And then you also had some bleeding.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't very detailed. My goal this next cycle, is to note more, as I've been working on the sensation. So it's like, whoa, and then I look and it's just really slimy. Then I just think, okay, that's fertile. But I guess getting more into the detail of noting the color and how far it stretches. Sometimes it just seems like it will just keep stretching, but it doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the 14th.
Okay, and then on the 15th and 16th, you had some bleeding. So what did that look like?
I actually, in the picture, it's purple. It should be purple. It looks red. Oops. Oh. No, it should be light purple. Okay. Yeah, I'm not bleeding.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it looks like bright red. So
it looks the same. I think I meant purple. Okay. Light purple.
Okay, that makes sense now. Okay, so then on the 15th and the 16th, you had non-peak.
Yeah, that would have been the shortest cycle I've ever had.
Well, because I thought it was red, I thought you might have had some spotting. So then I was looking at So when did ovulation take place? Because it's not uncommon to have a little bit of bleeding around ovulation at times. And so that was throwing me off. So that's helpful. Okay. So then that makes a lot more sense. So then that would put ovulation right around, like you said, potentially the 13th or 14th, around there. And then that would make sense with regards to your temperatures as well.
Yeah, that's what I felt. Yeah, I guess. Okay, so really careful noting around that time, the notations, all the notations.
But that makes a lot of sense. So when I look at your charts now with all the information, that's why I always have to ask lots of questions. So you're typically taking your temperature around 7, and then on the 10th day and the 11th day, your temperature was closer to 9, 8:30. And so that would make sense because these temperatures are a little bit higher, but that could have been more so because you were taking your temperature a little bit later. So that would then, I would actually put ovulation very likely on the 12th day. If these,
even though it has such a little,
well, I would wonder if, was there anything, do you remember if there was anything, let's see your notes, if there was anything happening on the 11th, if that might have been an outlier?
No, that was mid-work week, pretty normal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, based on everything that I see, it's somewhere around here. I think it's a bit of, the thing with temperatures is that temperatures can vary for a number of different reasons. So your temperatures can vary, as you know, because of if you get up a little bit later or a little bit earlier, if you're not feeling well, which you're not. But yeah, your temperatures can vary because of those kind of like when you're taking your temperature type of thing. They can also vary if you're not feeling well, obviously. And then other situations where they could vary is if you drink and you have, it's kind of funny how specific that is. But if you're drinking the day before, often you'll see a difference in your temperature the following day, or those types of things. So what I would encourage you to do for the following cycle would just be to, if there's anything that you do notice, just start making note of it with regards to your temperatures. So anything that could be impacting them. So you've got the temperature part here, which is really helpful. But if there's anything else that you notice, if you're not feeling well or anything like that, and you have been doing that, but I find that the first couple of charts when I'm working with a new client, especially, I often see temperature patterns that are pretty erratic, and I don't know what changes, but after we talk a little bit more about temperature taking and all those different types of things, often it just starts to get a little easier to interpret. And it might just be because now it's on your radar, all the different things that could be affecting your temperature.
Yeah, it's become a lot easier. My partner woke up before me today and he just handed me the thermometer. Yeah, it was challenging for me at first to not go to the bathroom first. And now I'm just trained and I just don't seem to have to go to the bathroom until after I take my temperature, which is nice. I just feel like I'm in the habit and just lay in bed for a couple minutes longer.
Well, I think that was one of the very first things that you asked me about. Am I remembering correctly? The temperature and the kind of challenge with being consistent with it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works. And what I find to be really interesting too is that, for all the clients that I work with, maybe I've just been fortunate, or maybe all of the ladies have just been fortunate, but typically the women who I work with, the partners, are fairly supportive of what they're doing as well. So that helps. And I know often the guy will be super involved too and want to be just as interested to see what's happening on the chart and to see when ovulation is happening. Sometimes not at all interested, and sometimes partner is not a guy. So it's, these situations can vary, but I think that it's nice to know that it's something that can be kind of a shared experience to some degree.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been lovely because it's our journey together and it affects both of us very much. Well, whether we want to have a little baby yet, no babies yet.
Yes, so we want to be on top of it. So let's talk a little bit about the rules and all that stuff. So maybe we could just start by, why don't you tell me which days are fertile in the cycle and which days are not, based on what you're seeing on your own chart.
All right, let's see. As of now, I will consider any day with bleeding fertile. And then the rule of 3 plays a role in many ways here. So bleeding is fertile because the time, the distance between ovulation can vary. So ovulation could be pushed closer to the end of bleeding, and you could possibly miss some mucus. So the rule of 3 is important because when there's noticeable mucus, that means that your vagina is more alkaline. So on any peak style mucus or on not peak style, that would be marked with purple or light purple, those would all be considered. And then it takes approximately 3 days to return back to acid sperm killing conditions, or not sperm welcoming conditions. So, so that would mean right now it just looks like the first 16 days of my cycle, maybe there's one dry day that would be infertile after the 3 days of dry. But other than that, it's still all considered fertile until I would have 3 dry days, because also I could have ovulated during the mucus days, but probably the peak mucus days. So then I'd want to wait three more days.
Well, I'll clarify the menstruation piece of it just a little bit more. So when you're first starting to chart, you would consider your menstruation fertile for a couple of reasons. And so I know some of you listening to the podcast follow different rules and have different charting methodologies. But when you're first starting to chart, you want to consider all days of bleeding to be fertile until you're able to really confidently identify when your true period is and when it's not. So that's the rationale behind that. And the reason for that is because some women do experience bleeding with ovulation. And depending on your particular situation, so Lita, this is different for you because you're not coming off of hormonal contraceptives. So I have a number of clients who have recently come off of hormonal contraceptives, and in those cases, it is not uncommon to have bleeding that is not your period, whether that is spotting, breakthrough bleeding, or bleeding around ovulation, or just anovulatory bleeding, just like all this bleeding. But it's not uncommon to have bleeding for different reasons, and so. And especially if a woman's been on hormonal contraceptives for a long time, then it might take her just a minute to really connect to, is this really my period or is this just a different type of bleeding? So that's the rationale behind that. And so in your case, you know what your period feels like because you've been having it and you've always been having it. And so that may not, that's something that we do as a precautionary measure, the first cycle. And then once you're comfortable with that, we move on to the next stage. So then the next stage is that when you have confirmed that you have ovulated, so you know that you ovulated 12 to 14 days ago, and you know that this is your menstruation, a true period, then you can consider your moderate or heavy days to be infertile, because on a moderate or heavy day of bleeding, your estrogen levels are just too low to trigger ovulation. And so then the next part of it is then when you get into your light and very light days, you can check for mucus on those days just like you would on any other day. So then from that perspective, so moving forward then to the next stage, you could consider those moderate heavy days of bleeding to be infertile. Your light day, if you're able to check for mucus, then you would check for mucus, and then you would put down your observation. So you'd have an L for light, and then if it was dry, you'd put a D, and then if you observed anything. And then if you were able to check on that day, then you would actually be able to consider these dry days, these pre-ovulatory dry days, to be infertile. And then this would be the start of your fertile window, day 9. And then it looks as though this is peak. So then we're in the middle of a count. We're in the midst of a count of 3, 1, 2, 3. So we would consider the 15th day, 16th day, 17th day to be fertile. And then we just have to wait until what we see on those days, make sure your temperature and everything line up. And so potentially the 18th day we would consider to be infertile.
Okay. So the count of 3 doesn't refer to non-peak style mucus?
It does. The count of 3. So mid-cycle, if you have 3 or more days of non-peak mucus, then you do a count of 3 after that. In this case, because this was your peak day and because it's associated with ovulation, the count of 3 is we count 3 days after your peak day, and then we look to see if it lines up with your temperature. And when those two line up, then that means that we've confirmed ovulation. So when you have that clear temperature shift and you have your peak day and those two things line up, then after we've confirmed ovulation, you are now in your infertile period. So, yippee!
So, yay! So, but I'd still want to observe. So, if I had a peak style mucus, that would bring us out into start looking at something else, not being, I would be considered fertile. And then if I had, so I'm probably going to have higher temperatures, but I guess if they're,
well, I mean, ultimately, that's why in the midst of all of this, it's kind of hard sometimes to figure it out, because I see your temperatures are kind of going up and down a little, but you did mention that you were not feeling well and all those things. So typically what I say when in the midst of it, when it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, is if you wait 3 days, it always makes sense. So it's not very helpful, but it is helpful.
Well, I got 2 big takeaways from that. So that means that, because I was thinking like, okay, that's a long time then. Oh, if I have to then wait 3 days after the mucus. So if we can confirm ovulation, then that makes that sooner. And then also the bleeding, if that was definitely a period, then that's good to know. Yay.
So then we have more days. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me just give you, so what I'm going to do is refer to the book real quick for just reinforcement of that. And maybe if you want to go to page 48. So for any of you listening, if you have a Justice User Guide, but basically, if you go to page 48, the top cycle, the 28-day cycle. So she has her period from days 1 through 5. And then she's able to check for mucus on her dry day, so the 5th day of her period, because it's a light day. So when she checks for mucus, then she doesn't have any. So then from that perspective, the heavy and moderate days are infertile. And then the light day she's able to check, so that's also infertile. And then she has her dry days 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then she starts to see mucus. So then she's in her fertile window here. And then her peak day is the 14th day. So the count of 3 starts after that. So the 15th, 16th, and 17th.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then she's from the 18th on, and then that would go into her heavy and moderate days of her period. So one of the things that I just want to check in with you about is, and maybe it'll be helpful if I just take a quick peek at your form again. Oh, and something else to mention. You mentioned something about having peak mucus after ovulation. I know that there are certain rare situations where that could happen, but ultimately you don't get peak mucus in your post-ovulatory phase, because after ovulation, your progesterone levels surge and that shuts down your mucus production. So if you ever had a situation where you legitimately had peak mucus, then potentially you haven't ovulated yet. Well,
I think I was just clarifying signs that would help me decide if I shouldn't confirm ovulation.
Oh, I see. Okay, yes. I see what you're saying. Well, I mean, the basic markers for confirming ovulation, and the interesting thing is that you don't need temperature to confirm ovulation. You don't actually, temperature is very helpful, and I'm not suggesting you don't use it, but you can use the rules with mucus just as you would. So if you have your peak day and then you count 3 and you go into your dry days, then just based on what you know about the biology and exactly what you were mentioning before, that the count of 3 allows your vagina to go back to that lovely sperm-killing acidic state, provided that then on that day, it's an infertile day, it's a dry day, then you know that it's outside of a count of 3, then you know that it's an infertile day. Have you been doing the semen elimination technique? Yes. You did it once.
Only one time. Yeah.
How did it go?
It worked. Squeezed and wiped.
Awesome. So your question earlier about how to tell the difference between mucus and semen and arousal fluid, there's a couple things. So one of the things is that after ovulation is a good time to get a sense of arousal fluid, because after ovulation, then you're not having peak mucus. So what you could do is pay attention after sex or after you're aroused or whatever situation might cause you to have arousal fluid. And that would give you an opportunity to get a better sense of what it's like so that you could more easily tell the difference. And there's situations where you might have lots of it, situations that you're not even close to thinking about right now, but later on down the line, if you're having babies and you're breastfeeding them, because of the physical reaction of suckling and how that triggers a hormonal response, that in of itself can trigger you to have arousal fluid. So it's not like, I think that I remember reading something, a woman she had a kind of a negative comment about breastfeeding, thinking that it has the potential to like turn you on. So it doesn't. Breastfeeding, it can be quite painful. The feeling is not pleasurable, but because of what is being stimulated hormonally, you can have arousal fluid. Anyway, so I'm just kind of highlighting some situations where learning how to differentiate that can be helpful, even though it's not right now. Yeah. But in terms of differentiating between semen and cervical mucus, when you use the semen elimination technique, which is essentially just after sex, if he ejaculates inside of you, you go to the bathroom and you push and wipe until there's no semen left. But once you do that, then it's gone. And so then you don't have to actually tell the difference because there's no more of it. That's the idea.
So then, yeah, if you do that correctly, then say you have sex at night, the next morning, it should be a clean slate, ideally.
Yeah, ideally. I mean, you might have a little bit of residual arousal fluid or something, but you wouldn't have any semen.
I'll practice trying to tell the difference next time I'm aroused.
Sounds good. And so in terms of the conservative rules for the method, when you're first starting to go unprotected, the conservative rules say to have sex every other evening of your dry days. And the reason for that, and even in your post-ovulatory, so that's like the super ultra conservative rules. The reason for that, yeah, and that's not all the time. That's just say your first cycle doing it. But the reason that the rationale behind that is to give you that bit of time so that you can feel comfortable that it's not semen. So once you're really confident in the semen elimination technique, and then you know that the next day there's no semen, then you're able to check for mucus the next day confidently and just be able to chart what you see and rely on it. And so you can play with that then in your luteal phase this time and see how comfortable you feel with everything. And then I would say, do that. And then once you get really confident in your post-ovulatory phase, then perhaps in a cycle or two, we could discuss moving this into the pre-ovulatory phase. But I think it's good to get a good sense and confidence in the post-ovulatory phase first.
I agree.
And you'll also have a sense.
Yeah. I'm getting more confident. I even noticed in our group call, I just felt like there were a couple things. I was like, oh, yay, I support you on that. And I feel like it's fun feeling like I have had a little more experience with a few cycles and some things that I am more confident in when I started. My own practice of it, that is where I get to through, but I feel like I have many of the pieces laid out. It's less confusing. I've had a lot of my questions answered. It's a lot more tangible now.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that, because ultimately, I think that it's so important, especially when you're relying on it for birth control. I hear this a lot with my clients. How have you found the experience of, sharing this with your partner and explaining it to him? Do you find that it's a little bit easier now to talk about it with him?
It always seemed easy. Yeah, he's really supportive. I feel like it almost seems less easy because it was so vague before. It was like, let's practice. Like I got to practice this. And now it's like, if I want to talk to him about, like, I know more details and more technical terms, and I think it makes it a little more confusing to him, or like, okay, good job. That's the thing you're working on. Not in a bad way. Just, I feel like it was a little more just like this project before that, like this lifestyle change.
What I think is really important as well, especially because there is a lot of detail, a lot of information at first. I think for some words of hope, and encouragement, is that part of the process is learning all of the nitty gritty, just so that and you have that deep understanding, and that shift that happens when you recognize that it's not about predicting. And even though we all have this magical idea of like, we're going to connect to our cycles and then they're going to be in tune with the moon and I'm just going to know when it's happening, you realize quite quickly that it's not really like that, because it can shift, but that's okay. But I think that once you get past this part where once you just have it down, then it becomes second nature, and then it's no longer a thing. So moving forward, then every day you just know if it's a fertile day or not. And I think the more important thing, because at the beginning I was talking about how there's no such thing as a perfect chart. There's never been a woman on the planet who hasn't missed a day of charting or something like that. And so I think the broader picture is recognizing and understanding what to do in those situations, and knowing that it doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as you know what to do in those types of situations, then you're able to still rely on the method, just because you're informed and you're not guessing. So you know enough to know that if I didn't check for mucus today, then I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
And before we go, what would you want the listeners to know just about the process and charting? So if someone's listening and they're thinking, I would really like to use this method for birth control, but I'm just not really confident that I could ever really trust it, what would you want them to know?
Well, yeah, over the last few months, I have become hopeful of this method. I see that with some of these simple self-observation tools, you can easily become a lot more confident. And if used correctly, this method is very accurate. It's just a new language to learn. My experience, it's become a language that's really worth learning with yourself, so that for a lifelong of benefits, I really look forward to using it for birth control, and then eventually for growing a family. But I feel like learning the method this way has been so helpful, having the guidance of Lisa and the group. Hearing other people's stories is really helpful, because then it has helped me have patience with myself, and also really break through have some aha moments with what has held me back from using it effectively. So there's hope, and this method is definitely a great resource.
Oh, thank you so much, Lydia. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/129. I hope that you enjoyed my episode with Lita. It was so much fun to be able to chat with her and to really dive into her cycles. Lita and I have been working together for a while, and I think one of the things that strikes me about working with Lita is that because she has never been on hormonal contraceptives, her cycles, they do look quite a bit different. So I find that every client is different, every experience is different, but I feel like there's kind of marked, obvious differences in her case just with regards to her cycle. So I think it's interesting, because it's so rare in this day and age where a woman has never used hormonal contraceptives, to the point where I often wonder if we really know what a healthy cycle looks like these days, because so many women, their cycles just don't look like that. So I feel like that's something to keep in mind, especially for those of you listening who have recently come off of hormonal contraceptives, or if you're thinking about coming off of them, if you've recently discovered the podcast and you're delving into this world of fertility awareness and not really sure if you could actually rely on this method for birth control confidently. I think that it's really important to know that it is possible, and you don't need to have perfect cycles to figure that out. I would argue that there's no such thing as a perfect cycle. Everyone's cycle is just different. And I come from the perspective that if your cycle is falling outside of the normal healthy parameters, it's more of your body's way of trying to communicate to you what's going on. So it's more of if you're paying attention, if you're listening, and if you're able to work with someone who knows how to read and interpret your charts, then you can really get a deep insight and deep window into what's happening with your body, what's happening with your fertility. And also, once you start addressing those things that are off, then you will start to see those results in real time on your chart. It's fantastic. I get so excited when we start to see those shifts on the chart. Sometimes I think I get more excited than my clients. I think I've said that before in my group sessions. But yes, I just wanted to share those thoughts with you, and I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. And of course, I want to invite you to join and become part of my upcoming group programs. If you enjoyed this episode today, if you resonated with it, and if you're wanting to have that extra degree of support in this process, and not just from me, but from other women who are also going through it, it's a really unique opportunity to be part of a group like this. And to be honest with you, I don't really know that there's very many or any groups like this that exist outside of this context. So it would be my pleasure and honor to have you in the group. Enrollment is now open. Spots are limited. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and apply today to be part of the program. And I also want to invite you to my live masterclass all about periods. And so the title of the class is What Does a Normal Period Look Like? And in that class, I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail about what is normal for menstruation and to really break it down. And so if you head over to fertilityfriday.com/masterclass, then you will see the page there where you can sign up and be part of the masterclass. So I'm going live, and it will be on April the 4th at 9 p.m. Eastern. And I would love to have you there. It's a great opportunity to have your questions answered. If you're live, then you actually have the opportunity to ask questions and participate. And I love that aspect of it. So I'd love to have you there. It really changes the dynamic when I'm able to jump in and answer your questions and go much deeper into the subject matter, and often in topics that I wouldn't necessarily have jumped right to. But if you're not able to join live, make sure to still sign up, because the only way that you'll be able to get the replay is if you sign up, and then you'll be on the list for that. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune into the podcast and let me be a part of your day. I love that you let me hang out with you when you're going for a walk or commuting to work, and I'm glad that I'm able to be part of that. And so thanks again. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.